Ladies and gentlemen, I want to speak to you today about something so profound, something so powerful, that it can change your perspective on the challenges you face every single day. It's a truth that many of us overlook, yet it is always at work, keeping us safe, keeping us strong, and most importantly, keeping us alive. I'm talking about God's protection. There's no more important level of security for us than faith, keeping us alive. I'm talking about God's protection. Now, I know we all face trials. We all have moments where danger lurks in unexpected corners. But I need you to understand something. When you're walking in His purpose, when you're trusting in His plan, God will show up in ways you can't even imagine. Right here in Pacific Palisades, you may be facing obstacles. But know this, God's protection is always there. You're not afraid. Our situation may be challenging, but God will show up in ways you can't even imagine. Right here in Pacific Palisades, you may be facing obstacles, but know this, God's protection is always there. Let's talk about some signs that God is keeping you safe, even when you don't see it. You've probably experienced moments in your life when things don't go as planned. You're headed down a particular path, everything seems to be lining up, and then suddenly something changes. A detour appears out of nowhere. You hit traffic when you were supposed to arrive early. You miss an important turn, or a plan you've worked hard on falls apart. And in those moments, it's easy to become frustrated. You ask yourself, why now? Why this? Why me? You feel like you're being held back from your destination, but let me tell you, there's something deeper happening. So, what if, just what if, that detour isn't a setback, but a protection? What if that very moment you see as an inconvenience is actually God's hand guiding you away from danger? Think about it. You're cruising along in life, confident and comfortable in your decisions, when out of nowhere something shifts. You miss that exit, that meeting gets canceled, or you're told to wait just a little longer. In the moment, it's frustrating. You wonder why something as simple as an unexpected detour could throw you off course. But sometimes God's protection doesn't look like a clear and straight path. It's a detour. There are moments in life where God has to redirect you, not because you've done anything wrong, but because there's something up ahead that you're not meant to face. You might be heading toward a situation, a person, or an opportunity that looks great on paper, but has hidden dangers. And that detour is God's way of stepping in, keeping you safe, and rerouting you to a better place. You may not see it in the moment, but you will eventually. Think of the times when you've had to cancel plans at the last minute. Maybe it was an event you were so excited about, but something came up and you just couldn't go. Or maybe you decided to stay home when everyone else was going out. In those moments, you can feel like you're missing out. You feel left behind, like life is passing you by. But God, in His wisdom, saw what you couldn't, and His wisdom saw what you couldn't. There was something in that situation that could have harmed you, whether physically, emotionally, or spiritually. Maybe it wasn't a direct danger, but perhaps it was a toxic environment, a person with bad intentions, or even just the wrong timing. God knows the dangers you can't see, and when you're in tune with His purpose for your life, He will move things around to protect you. That missed event or that last-minute change of plans wasn't a coincidence. It was God moving in the background, orchestrating things in your favor. I've seen it happen time and time again. People get frustrated because they can't understand why things aren't happening the way they thought they would. But if we zoom out and look at the bigger picture, we often realize that those detours were exactly what we needed. It's not always easy to trust in God's timing or his protection. We want things to happen according to our schedule. We want the success, the breakthrough, the answer to prayer right now. But God isn't confined by time the way we are. He sees things from a perspective we can't even begin to comprehend. Imagine you're on a road trip, heading toward a destination that's been your dream for years. You've planned every detail, every route, every stop along the way. But as you're driving, you come across a sudden roadblock. Your first reaction might be frustration, anger, or confusion. Why now? Why is this happening? But as you sit there waiting, something incredible happens. You begin to notice things you hadn't seen before. You spot an alternative route, one that not only gets you to your destination, but takes you through beautiful, unexpected scenery along the way. The detour wasn't a setback. It was a new route to the same destination, only better. And that's exactly how God works in our lives. When we're heading towards something and he knows there's danger or destruction ahead, he will allow a detour to shift our direction. In the moment, we may not understand it, but when we look back, we realize it was his way of protecting us from what we couldn't see. It wasn't a failure. It was divine protection. Sometimes the detour happens not because there's something dangerous ahead, but because there's something even better waiting for you further down the road. There are things you couldn't have prepared for, things that will shape you, grow you, and bring you to a place of greater purpose. What you think you want or need might not be what's best for you. And God, in his infinite wisdom, will gently guide you in another direction. This detour may be the very thing that leads to a greater blessing, a deeper understanding of his will for your life. So following him does not always feel like the right thing to do. You've heard stories of people missing flights, only to find out later that the flight they would have been on was delayed or even had to be rerouted because of mechanical issues or bad weather. Those people might have been frustrated at the time, thinking they'd missed out on an opportunity. But God, in his perfect timing, spared them from a potentially dangerous situation. The detour wasn't an inconvenience. It was a blessing in disguise. And let's not forget about the times when detours bring us closer to the people we need in our lives. Maybe you've experienced an unplanned meeting or a random encounter that led to lasting relationships. Perhaps that detour took you to someone who would later be a source of support, wisdom, or love when you needed it most. Sometimes we're redirected not just for our own safety, but for the divine connections that will shape our future. When you trust God's plan, when you surrender your agenda to his will, you begin to understand that the detours are not obstacles. They are opportunities. Opportunities to grow in faith, to trust in his wisdom, and to see his protection in action. So the next time you find yourself frustrated by an unexpected detour, take a step back. Take a deep breath. Trust that God knows exactly where he's leading you, and that detour is part of his divine protection. You are not being held back. You are being guided to a place of greater purpose, safety, and blessing. There are moments in life when everything around you seems to be falling apart. You feel the weight of the world on your shoulders, and yet there's a strange sense of peace that settles within you. It doesn't make sense. You should be anxious. You should be stressed, but somehow you're not. You're calm. You're at ease. It's as if everything is going to be all right, even when the circumstances around you say otherwise. That peace, that calm, is one of the clearest signs that God is protecting you. It's not a peace that comes from a lack of problems or from having all the answers. It's a peace that transcends understanding. A peace that can only come from God himself. It's the kind of peace that stays with you when you face adversity, when you walk through fire, when you feel like everything is crumbling. And let me tell you, that peace is a powerful form of protection. And let me tell you, that peace is a powerful form of protection. When we experience difficult times, we tend to look for answers. We want to fix things. We want to make sense of the chaos. We pray for relief, for a way out. But sometimes God's protection doesn't come in the form of a solution or a quick fix. Sometimes his protection comes in the form of peace. He allows you to experience peace in the middle of the storm. And that peace is the shield that guards your heart and mind. You see, when we're in the middle of a crisis, it's easy to become overwhelmed by fear and anxiety. We start to imagine all the worst case scenarios. We begin to spiral, unable to find our footing. But God's peace does something incredible. It anchors you. It holds you steady when the waves are crashing all around you. It's a calm that doesn't make sense because it doesn't come from the situation. It comes from God himself. God bless you. There's a story in the Bible where Jesus and his disciples are on a boat crossing the sea. A storm arises, the wind and the waves are fierce, and the disciples are terrified. They wake Jesus, who is asleep, and ask him, "Don't you care that we're about to drown?" And what does Jesus do? He gets up, rebukes the wind and the waves, and immediately there's a great calm. But then he turns to his disciples and asks them, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" What we often forget when we face our storms is that Jesus is with us in the boat. He's not unaware of the challenges we face, and he's certainly not caught off guard by the storms in our lives. He is the one who has control over the wind and the waves. And when we place our trust in him, he gives us peace. Not the peace that the world offers, but a peace that guards our hearts and minds, even in the midst of the fiercest storms. When we experience this peace, it's a sign that God is protecting us from the fear and anxiety that can consume us. We live in a world that thrives on chaos and noise. Everywhere you turn, there's something pulling for your attention, trying to steal your peace. The news, social media, the demands of life. All of it can leave you feeling overwhelmed, stressed, and exhausted. But God's peace is different. It doesn't depend on circumstances. It's not tied to what's happening around you. It's rooted in the presence of God. And when you tap into that peace, it becomes your shield. This peace isn't just for moments of crisis, it's for everyday life. God's protection isn't just about keeping us safe in the big dramatic moments. It's also about protecting our hearts and minds in the ordinary everyday challenges. It's about finding peace in the midst of a busy schedule, peace in the midst of relationships that are difficult, peace when things don't go as planned. That peace is a reminder that God is with you in all things, and he's watching over you every step of the way. Sometimes God's peace comes when we stop striving and start trusting. We get so caught up in trying to control everything and trying to fix everything ourselves that we forget to surrender to him. We forget that we don't have to have all the answers, that we don't have to make everything work on our own. And when we finally let go and allow God to take the lead, we experience that peace that surpasses all understanding. It's a peace that says, I don't know how this is going to work out, but I know that God is in control. And that peace allows us to rest, to trust, and to move forward without fear. But let's be clear, this peace doesn't mean that everything will be perfect. It doesn't mean that life will be free of challenges. It doesn't mean that you won't face storms. What it does mean is that even in the midst of those challenges, God will give you the peace you need to navigate them. He will protect your heart from fear, your mind from anxiety, and your soul from despair. He will calm the storm inside of you, even when the storm around you continues to rage. I've heard many people say that they've experienced this kind of peace in situations where, by all accounts, they should have been panicking. Maybe they were facing a health crisis, a financial setback, or a difficult relationship. And yet, in the midst of it all, there was this inexplicable calm. It wasn't that the situation was easy or that everything was going well, but there was a sense of peace that kept them steady. That peace, my friends, is a sign of God's protection. It's the protection that comes not from the absence of problems, but from the presence of God. There will be times when life feels like a whirlwind, when everything seems to be spinning out of control. But in those moments, remember that God's peace is always available to you. He's right there in the middle of the storm, offering you the peace that only He can give. And when you embrace that peace, it will guard your heart and mind, protecting you from the fear and anxiety that threaten to overwhelm you. You'll find yourself standing firm, rooted in the knowledge that God is in control and that His peace is greater than any storm. Think back to a time when you were at a low point, unsure of where to turn or what to do. Maybe you were facing a difficult situation, struggling with your emotions, or feeling like you were alone in the battle. Then, out of nowhere, someone appeared. A friend, a stranger, even someone you hadn't spoken to in a long time. They showed up just when you needed them most. They offered a word of encouragement, a listening ear, or a helping hand. That moment, that encounter may have seemed like a coincidence, but I believe it was something much more significant. It was God's protection at work. There are times in life when we are so focused on our own struggles, so caught up in our own fears, that we fail to see the divine interventions happening all around us. But God doesn't leave us to fight our battles alone. He sends people into our lives at just the right time. People who can offer guidance, strength, and support when we need it most. Sometimes these people come in the form of close friends, family members, or mentors. Other times they come in the form of strangers, people who cross our paths unexpectedly with the exact help or encouragement we need. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring to your attention Brian Lay. When you look back on those moments, you realize that they weren't random. They were God's way of providing for you, of protecting you when you couldn't protect yourself. He uses people as instruments of His protection, placing them in your life to shield you from harm, to lift you up, and to remind you that you are not alone. These are the people who are there for you when no one else is. The ones who speak life into you when you've lost all hope. They're the ones who offer a prayer, a smile, or a kind word at just the right moment. And while it may seem like coincidence, it's actually divine intervention. Think about the people who have come into your life at the perfect time. Maybe it was a phone call from an old friend just when you were feeling isolated. Maybe it was a colleague who reached out to offer support when you were overwhelmed at work. Maybe it was a stranger who offered you a simple act of kindness, like holding the door open or offering a word of encouragement when you needed it most. These small moments can often be overlooked, but they are signs of God's protection. He's using these people to show you that He sees you, that He knows your struggles, and that He's always with you, even in your most difficult moments. There are times when we think we can handle everything on our own. We convince ourselves that we don't need anyone, that we can figure it out by ourselves. But God knows better. He knows that we are not meant to go through life alone. He designed us for community, for connection, and for relationships. And when we find ourselves in the midst of a struggle, He sends people into our lives to remind us of that truth. These people may not always have the answers we're looking for, and they may not always be able to fix our problems, but that's not what God is asking of them. He's asking them to show up, to offer a listening ear, to give us the support we need to keep going. And sometimes that's all we need, to know that someone cares, to know that someone is there, and to know that we don't have to face life's challenges alone. I've heard countless stories of people who have experienced this kind of divine protection through others. A woman struggling with the loss of a loved one receives a call from an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years. A man overwhelmed by the pressures of work has a chance encounter with a colleague who offers a word of encouragement, reminding him of his worth and strength. A young person struggling with doubt is lifted up by a mentor who sees their potential and speaks life into them. These moments, these people, are God's way of showing us that He's watching over us, that He's providing for us in ways we can't always see. It's important to recognize these people as gifts from God. They are His hands and feet in our lives, offering protection, support, and love when we need it most. And it's not just the big moments that matter. Sometimes it's the small, everyday interactions that make all the difference. A kind word from a stranger, a smile from a friend, a hug from a loved one. These acts of love and care are all signs of God's protection. They remind us that we are part of a bigger plan, that God is working through others to provide for us, to protect us, and to help us when we need it most. There are times when we're so focused on the problems we're facing that we don't even notice the people around us who are trying to help. We become so consumed by our struggles that we fail to see the love and support being offered. But God never stops working. He never stops sending people into our lives to protect us, to guide us, and to show us His love. Love is not something to be afraid of. Love is something that very few people understand. Love is the Bible. And when we open our hearts to those people, when we allow them to be vessels of God's protection, we begin to see the beauty in the way God works. These people are not just there to fix our problems, they're there to show us God's love in action. They are reminders that God is with us, that He is actively working to protect us, and that He will never leave us to face our struggles alone. Sometimes the best way to experience God's protection is through the people He places in our lives. They are the tangible expression of His love, the physical manifestation of His care, and the instruments He uses to show us that we are never alone. So the next time you find yourself in a difficult situation, take a moment to look around. Look for the people who are there to support you, to lift you up, and to show you that God is watching over you. They may not always have the answers you're looking for, but they are a reminder that you are not alone in your struggles. God is using them to protect you, to guide you, and to show you His love in ways that only He can. And when you recognize those moments, you'll realize just how deeply God cares for you, and how He uses the people around you to shield you from harm and lead you to the strength and comfort you need. There are times in life when we find ourselves at a crossroads, unsure of which way to turn, uncertain of what the future holds, and overwhelmed by the weight of decisions that seem impossible to make. These moments can leave us feeling stuck, paralyzed by doubt, and struggling to trust in our ability to make the right choices. It's in these moments, however, that God's protection is often at its most evident. When you feel lost, when you're at your lowest, and when you don't know which way to go, God's guiding hand steps in, leading you in the direction He has already prepared for you. The truth is that we don't always have the clarity or the understanding to see the bigger picture. We don't always know why things happen the way they do, why we experience certain challenges, or why some doors close while others open. But God, in His infinite wisdom, sees the whole story. He knows exactly where he's leading you, even when you can't see the way ahead. And this is where his protection comes into play, not just in keeping you safe from harm, but in guiding you toward the life he has planned for you. And as I said, this life looks different than the one you're used to. When we talk about God's protection, it's not just about him keeping us physically safe. His protection is also about his guidance, his direction, and his presence in our lives as we make decisions, face challenges, and navigate through life. He's not just shielding us from danger. He's also showing us the path to take, opening and closing doors, and positioning us in ways that will fulfill his purpose for us. This guidance can come in many forms. It might be a feeling of peace that settles in your heart when you're making a decision. It might be a sense of urgency when you're supposed to move in a certain direction. Or a calm, steady assurance when you're unsure of the outcome. It's a quiet confidence that allows you to move forward, knowing that God is with you every step of the way. It's easy to become discouraged when things don't go according to our plans. When we think we've figured everything out and the path we've chosen suddenly seems to be leading us in the wrong direction, can feel like a failure. But in those moments, we must remember that God's plans are far greater than our own. What seems like a closed door or a detour is often God's way of protecting us from something we can't see. When we face setbacks or closed doors, we can trust that God is working behind the scenes, redirecting us to a path that is better for us, one that will bring us closer to his purpose and his will for our lives. Ladies and gentlemen, congregation, let me introduce you to my brother. There's a story in the Bible that perfectly illustrates this idea. The Apostle Paul, in his missionary journeys, was trying to go to a particular region to spread the gospel. However, the Bible tells us that the Holy Spirit would not allow him to go in that direction. At first, Paul might have been confused. After all, his desire to spread the gospel was in line with God's will, so why would God prevent him from going? But as it turns out, God had a different plan. He redirected Paul to another region where he would encounter people who were ready to hear the message of Jesus. What appeared to be an obstacle was in fact God's protection, guiding Paul to the right place at the right time. Just as God protected Paul from going down the wrong path, he does the same for us. We may not always understand why things don't go the way we expect, but we can trust that God's hand is in it all. He's guiding us, protecting us from making decisions that would lead us away from his will, and positioning us exactly where we need to be. It may feel frustrating in the moment, but with time, we often look back and realize that God's timing was perfect, and that the closed doors, the redirections, and the challenges we faced were part of his protection. It may seem like an unfair punishment, but I promise you this end of the story is for the best. Sometimes God's guidance comes in the form of a sense of peace that accompanies a decision. Have you ever had a moment when you were facing a big decision and you felt completely at ease about it? Even though you didn't have all the answers, you didn't know how it would work out, but there was a calmness in your heart that told you it was the right choice. That peace isn't a coincidence. It's God's way of confirming to you that you're on the right path. When you're in tune with God's voice, when you seek his guidance in prayer and trust in his plan for your life, you will experience that peace that passes all understanding. It's his protection, giving you the confidence to move forward even when the future is uncertain. On the other hand, there are times when God's guidance comes through the absence of peace, a sense of unrest, or feeling that something isn't quite right. These feelings can be just as powerful and protective as the moments of peace. They are signs that God is closing a door or warning you to proceed with caution. When we feel unease or hesitation about a decision, it's important to listen to that still, small voice within us. If you can listen to this voice within us, sometimes the darkness comes loose. And when the unease or hesitation about a decision, sometimes the protection we need isn't about finding the right answer. It's about avoiding the wrong one. God's protection can come in the form of redirection, of helping us avoid paths that would lead us to harm, to unhealthy situations, or to places where we would not be able to grow and thrive. There's also something powerful about God's protection through the wisdom of others. Sometimes He places wise people in our lives who can offer counsel and advice when we're unsure of which way to go. These people may not always have all the answers, but they have a perspective that we might not see. They offer guidance, wisdom, and encouragement that help us make better decisions. This is God's protection too. He uses others to steer us in the right direction, to help us avoid mistakes, and to point us toward His will. At times, it may feel like you're alone in the decision-making process, that no one understands the weight of the choices you're facing. But remember that God is always with you, guiding you and providing the wisdom you need. He will never leave you to navigate life's decisions on your own. He's there in every moment, offering His protection through His guidance, through His peace, and through the wisdom of others. Ultimately, God's protection in decision-making is about trusting Him. It's about surrendering our plans, our desires, and our timelines to Him and trusting that He knows what's best for us. It's about walking by faith, knowing that He's leading us down the path He's already prepared, even when we can't see the way ahead. When we place our trust in Him, when we allow Him to guide us, we can be confident that we are walking in His protection. He is with us every step of the way, guiding us to the place where His purpose for our lives will be fulfilled. There are moments in our lives when we find ourselves in the midst of a storm. The winds of adversity seem to be howling around us, the rain is pouring down, and the thunder of uncertainty shakes us to our core. It's in these moments that we often feel the most vulnerable, as if the weight of our struggles will crush us and there's no way out. But what if I told you that even in the darkest of storms, God is actively working to protect you? What if I told you that His protection doesn't just mean keeping you safe from physical harm, but it also means shielding you from the emotional, mental, and spiritual turmoil that life can bring? When we face trials and difficulties, it's easy to believe that we're alone, that God has forgotten about us, or that we've been abandoned. But nothing could be further from the truth. God's protection doesn't always come in the form of a miraculous escape from our circumstances, but it does come in the form of strength, peace, and resilience to face those circumstances. And His protection doesn't mean that we won't experience storms, but it does mean that we will never face them without His presence. Have you ever experienced a time when you felt like you were in the middle of a storm and yet somehow you made it through? It wasn't because you were so strong on your own or because you had everything figured out. It was because God's protection surrounded you even when you couldn't see it. May the Lord give you the strength and the power to choose and the results to remain as healthy and stable as anything else. It's easy to look back on those moments and see how God was working behind the scenes, orchestrating events and providing you with the strength you needed. But in the middle of the storm, it's harder to see. The beauty of God's protection is that He doesn't just step in when we're in danger. He's constantly surrounding us, even when we're unaware. Every day, he is shielding us from things we don't even see coming. Things that can harm us emotionally, physically, or spiritually. He is the shield around us, guarding us from the dangers we're unaware of, while also providing us with the strength to face the ones we know are coming. Consider the times when you've felt the weight of life's burdens. Maybe you've gone through a period of loss, of heartbreak, or of fear about the future. It can feel like everything is falling apart, and yet when you look back, you realize that you made it through that season. You're standing here today despite the storms you've weathered. That's not by accident. That's God's protection at work. Holding you up when you couldn't hold yourself. Providing peace when your mind was restless. And giving you the strength to keep going when you felt like giving up. But there's something else about God's protection that we need to recognize. It's not always about the big moments, the dramatic interventions, or the miraculous escapes. Sometimes God's protection is found in the small, quiet moments. Sometimes his protection is in the simple fact that you woke up this morning, that you have breath in your lungs, that you have a roof over your head and food on your table. There's so many things we take for granted every day, but every single one of those things is a gift from God's hand, a sign of his constant protection over our lives. If we have truly no idea of what we are losing, focus on what you can gain. And when you're facing difficulties, when life is challenging, it's easy to overlook these smaller blessings. We become so focused on what's going wrong, on what we don't have, or on what we think we're missing, that we forget to see the ways God is already protecting us. We forget to see the ways he's already provided, the ways he's already been faithful. It's in these moments that we need to shift our perspective. We need to recognize that even in the midst of struggle, God is present and he's working all things for our good. There's also the reality that God's protection isn't always immediate. Sometimes we pray for an answer, we ask for relief, and yet we don't receive it right away. This can be one of the most challenging aspects of God's protection. Waiting. But even in the waiting, God's protection is at work. His timing is perfect and his ways are higher than ours. The delay doesn't mean he's not protecting you. It doesn't mean that he's not protecting you. It means he's working in ways you can't see, preparing you for something greater or protecting you from something you don't understand yet. But this means everything in life has a purpose. Something bigger than the self. Think about the times in your life when things didn't work out the way you expected them to. Maybe you lost a job, went through a breakup, or faced a setback. At the time, it felt like a failure. But later on, you realize that those very setbacks were part of God's protection. Had you stayed in that relationship, had you kept that job, or had you followed the path you thought you should take, you might have missed out on the blessings God had waiting for you. Sometimes God's protection comes in the form of a closed door, a detour, or a change in direction. We might not understand it at the time, but in retrospect, we can see how he was guiding us, protecting us from something that wasn't meant for us. Everything happens for a reason. You understand that? That means an opportunity has come around. In the Bible, we see countless examples of God's protection in the lives of his people, from the Israelites being led out of Egypt and protected from the Egyptians, to David being shielded from King Saul's attacks, to Jesus calming the storm for his disciples. We see that God's protection is a constant theme throughout Scripture. But perhaps the greatest example of God's protection is seen in Jesus Christ himself. God protected humanity from the ultimate danger, eternal separation from him, by sending his son to die on the cross. Through Jesus, we find the ultimate protection. the ultimate salvation, and the ultimate security. But even with the ultimate protection in Christ, we are still living in a world full of storms, challenges, and difficulties. The difference is that as believers, we have the assurance that God is with us in those storms. He is our refuge and strength, our ever-present help in trouble. This doesn't mean the storms won't come, but it does mean that we don't have to face them alone. We can find peace in knowing that God is with us, protecting us, and guiding us through every trial. When life is difficult, when the storms of life seem overwhelming, it's important to remember that God's protection is not a promise of a life free from hardship. It's a promise that no matter what we face, He will be with us, shielding us from harm and giving us the strength to endure. It's a promise that no matter how fierce the storm, we can find peace in the fact that God is our protector, and He will never leave us to face life's struggles alone. In every chapter of life, there are moments when we face challenges that seem insurmountable. It could be the weight of financial struggles, the pain of loss, the burden of anxiety, or the uncertainty about what the future holds. In these moments, it's easy to feel as though we are standing alone, facing a battle that we can't win, or walking through a wilderness with no clear direction. But it is precisely in these moments that God's protection is most evident, often in ways we don't immediately recognize. It's in the unseen and the unexpected that His care, His shelter, and His provision become most clear. God's protection isn't just about guarding us from the physical dangers that may lie ahead. It's also about His presence in the quiet, everyday moments of our lives. It's in the way He surrounds us with peace when we're overwhelmed, the way He gives us wisdom when we face difficult decisions, and the way He steps in at just the right time, often in ways we didn't anticipate. His protection is a constant, not just an intervention when things go wrong. It's woven into the fabric of our lives, even when we don't realize it. When we talk about God's protection, we're talking about more than just the moments of obvious danger. Protection is about His careful, deliberate guidance in every aspect of our lives. Sometimes we don't know the dangers we're walking toward. Sometimes we don't see the pitfalls ahead. But God sees everything. He knows every detail of our lives, and He watches over us with an unwavering love that is designed to keep us safe from the things we can't see. In fact, many times the danger we face isn't visible to us until after the fact, when we realize that God steered us away from something harmful, but He did not steer us away from something better. If you were in college and many people dropped out, one of the most powerful aspects of God's protection is that it's not just about keeping us safe from physical harm. It's also about shielding our hearts and minds from the emotional and spiritual attacks that can tear us apart. Life has a way of wearing us down, of making us question who we are, what we believe, and where we belong. The world can be loud, harsh, and demanding, and it can often leave us feeling small, insignificant, and vulnerable. But God's protection covers us in these moments too. It is His love that holds us steady when the world tries to convince us that we are worthless. His truth that reminds us of our identity when lies surround us, and His promises that bring us peace when anxiety tries to take over. Think about the times in your life when you felt that overwhelming weight. The moments when the pressure seemed unbearable. Maybe you've had moments of doubt, times when you wondered if you were on the right path, or when you faced rejection or disappointment that shook your confidence. In those moments, God's protection was working behind the scenes, ensuring that the blows you experienced didn't destroy you. You may not have seen it at the time, but His strength was holding you up. His love was filling the cracks, and His presence was a refuge from the storm. Our refuge, like his refuge, is in the presence. The destruction and the peril of the world is everywhere. Sometimes his protection shows up in the form of unexpected people. Perhaps you've been in a situation where you were struggling, unsure how to move forward, and someone came alongside you with encouragement, a kind word, or even just a listening ear. In those moments, God uses people to remind you that you're not alone, to affirm you when you need it most, and to guide you back to his truth. These are the small, often unnoticed ways that God is working in your life. His protection isn't just about big, dramatic interventions. Sometimes it's in the quiet, everyday moments when someone simply offers a word of support that makes all the difference. The accountant gentleman joined me today to talk about how his expert association skills helped grow his business. He teaches the law of attraction. On the other hand, there are times when God's protection may seem invisible, when we feel isolated or abandoned. During those times, it's important to remember that God's protection isn't always about preventing something from happening. It's also about giving us the strength to endure, to keep going when it feels like we can't take another step. There may be seasons in life where the trials seem relentless, where the storms don't let up, and where we wonder why we're being tested. In those moments, God's protection is found in his faithfulness, his strength, and his presence in the midst of the storm. His protection is not just about shielding us from harm, but also about walking with us through the fire, refining us and preparing us for something greater. There are many examples in Scripture where God's protection is evident even in the midst of trials. Consider the story of Joseph, who was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, and imprisoned for something he didn't do. Yet throughout his entire journey, God's hand of protection was upon him. God didn't prevent Joseph from going through the trials, but he was with him in the midst of them. This is life-changing stuff. It was with him in the midst of them. God used those very trials to shape Joseph into the man who would later save his family and many others. What seemed like abandonment was actually God's protection in the form of preparation for the future. Joseph's story is a powerful reminder that God's protection is not always about keeping us from hardship, but rather about using that hardship to grow us and prepare us for his greater purpose, and saving our bona fide souls from the flames that would otherwise slaughter and destroy us, to be greater purpose. Another example of God's protection is seen in the life of Daniel. When Daniel was thrown into the lion's den for refusing to worship anyone other than God, it seemed like certain death. But God protected Daniel by shutting the mouths of the lions, keeping him safe through the most dangerous of circumstances. St. Paul writes deeply about how the Bible was written for Daniel, and certainty, trust, and protection. This was a miraculous act of protection. But even in a more ordinary sense, God had been preparing Daniel all along, giving him the wisdom and strength to stand firm in his faith, even when the consequences were dire. Daniel's life shows us that God's protection isn't always about immediate rescue from danger. It's about preparing us to stand strong in the face of adversity. It's trusting that he will sustain us when we need him most. There will be moments when we face battles that we don't understand, when we walk through valleys that seem too deep to navigate. But in those moments, God's protection is still at work. He may not always remove us from the difficulty, but he will always be with us through it. And when we look back, we often realize that it was in those very moments that God's protection was most evident, when his strength was most apparent, and when his presence was the most comforting. God's protection isn't just for the physical, visible dangers, it's for the battles that rage in our hearts, minds, and spirits. It's about knowing that no matter what we face, we are not alone. His protection isn't just about shielding us from what is seen. It's about guarding us from what we cannot see, strengthening us when we are weak, and surrounding us when we are weak, and surrounding us with His love and peace when we need it most. It's about trusting that He is always working for our good, even in the moments when we feel unsure. And knowing that His protection is more than just a shield, it's the very foundation of our faith, our hope, and our security. There are times in life when everything feels uncertain, the path ahead is unclear, and the challenges seem insurmountable. The weight of the world presses down on your shoulders, and it's easy to feel like you're standing alone in the midst of a storm. It's in these moments of vulnerability that God's protection becomes more evident than ever before. While it's natural to seek shelter from the physical storms of life, there are also storms we can't always see. Emotional, spiritual, and mental storms that can leave us battered and exhausted. But the beauty of God's protection is that it doesn't just extend to the visible dangers. It covers the unseen, the quiet moments of our hearts and minds when we need it most. It's easy to overlook the quiet ways God protects us, especially when we're caught up in the chaos of our circumstances. But His presence, His protection, and His love are always there, even when we don't immediately recognize them. God's protection is not just about safety from external threats. It's about His constant, watchful care over our entire being. We can face physical dangers and trials that test our strength, but God's protection also extends to the parts of us that can't be touched by the outside world. The parts of us that house our deepest thoughts, our fears, and our desires. Life has a way of testing us, pushing us to our limits, and making us question who we are and what we're capable of. In these times, we may feel like we're fighting a battle we can't win, and we wonder how much longer we can keep going. But even in those moments of despair, God is protecting us. His protection doesn't always come in the form of immediate relief or an escape from our difficulties. It comes in the form of His constant presence, His provision of strength, and His ability to carry us through the storms of life. Think about the moments in your life when you felt at your lowest. Maybe you faced a crisis, whether personal, relational, or professional, and it seemed like everything was falling apart. You couldn't see a way out, and the weight of the situation felt unbearable. In those moments, it's easy to doubt whether God is truly there, whether He's really protecting you. But the reality is that God's protection often works in ways we can't immediately see. His protection is not just about preventing pain, but about equipping us with the strength to endure it, about making sure that even when we're knocked down, we don't stay down for long. His protection is a steady presence, a quiet reminder that we are not alone, that He is always with us, and that He is working in ways we may not understand in the moment. His protection for me is learning in ways we may not understand in the moment. There is something profoundly comforting in knowing that God sees us. He sees the struggles we face, the pain we carry, and the burdens we bear. He understands the battles that rage within us, the silent struggles we fight when no one is looking. And in that deep personal understanding, He offers us His protection. His protection is a shield for our hearts, a guard for our minds, and a refuge for our souls. When the world feels like it's pressing in and we don't know where to turn, God stands as our protector, ready to surround us with His peace and His strength. Protection isn't always about avoiding hardship. In fact, sometimes hardship is part of the journey. God allows us to go through trials, not because he wants to see us suffer, but because he knows that those trials can shape us, refine us, and bring us closer to him. It's in the midst of hardship that we learn to lean on him, to trust in his timing, and to rely on his strength. This doesn't mean that the pain doesn't hurt or that the journey is easy, but it means that we can walk through those difficult times with the assurance that God is with us, that he will never leave us, and that his protection will carry us through. Consider the way a parent protects a child. A parent doesn't always shield their child from every difficulty, but they are always present, guiding and supporting, offering comfort when needed. God is the same way with us. He doesn't always remove every obstacle, but he is with us through every step of the journey, offering his guidance, his comfort, and his love. His protection is not about removing all of life's challenges. It's about walking through those challenges with us, providing us with the strength and courage we need to face them head on. The protection of God is not just for the big dramatic moments. It is woven into the fabric of our everyday lives. It's in the way he gives us wisdom when we don't know what to do, the way he opens doors of opportunity when we feel stuck, and the way he calms our hearts when we're filled with worry. His protection is in the small, quiet moments that often go unnoticed, the moments when we feel a sudden sense of peace, when a word of encouragement comes at just the right time, or when we experience a shift in perspective that helps us see things in a new light. These are all signs of God's protection, his hand at work in our lives, even when we don't realize it. In the moments when we feel weak, when we feel like we can't go any further, God's protection steps in as a source of strength. He lifts us up when we are weary, carries us when we are too tired to take another step, and fills us with hope when it seems like all hope is lost. It's not always about avoiding the struggles of life. It's not always about avoiding the struggles of life. It's about knowing that no matter what we face, we don't face it alone. God is with us every step of the way, providing the strength we need to keep moving forward, even when we don't feel like we can. When we talk about God's protection, it's important to remember that it's not always something that we can see or touch. It's not always a physical shield, but a spiritual covering. It's the peace that surpasses understanding, the joy that comes in the midst of sorrow, and the strength that rises up within us when we feel like we've reached our breaking point. That spiritual protection we feel when we've reached our breaking point. God's protection is felt in our hearts and minds, in the deep assurance that he is with us, guiding us and watching over us, even in the hardest times. It's in the quiet moments when we feel his presence, and it's in the loud moments when we need his strength to carry on. This protection isn't limited to just the difficult times. It extends to every area of our lives, our relationships, our work, our decisions, and our journeys. God is with us in the small moments and the big ones. He's present in the ordinary and the extraordinary. No area of our lives is too small for his care, and no challenge is too great for his protection. Whether we're facing a crisis or simply going through the routine of daily life, God's protection is there, covering us, guarding us, and providing for us in ways we may not always recognize, but can always trust. Anecdotally, experts tell us that having one's life together can help deal with stress and lead to better mental health and even more physical and social. As we walk through life, we can be confident that God's protection is with us. It doesn't always look the way we expect, and it doesn't always come in the form we think it should, but it is always there, whether we see it or not, whether we feel it or not. God's protection is a constant presence, And it is this protection that allows us to face the unknown with courage, the difficult moments with hope, and the challenges of life with faith. It is in His protection that we find our true strength, our true peace, and our true security. As we reflect on the 7 signs that God is protecting us from danger, we begin to understand that His protection is not limited to the physical or tangible things we can see. It is far more than just a shield against danger or a barrier to prevent harm. God's protection is all-encompassing. It touches every area of our lives. It touches every area of our lives. His protection is in the quiet moments when we feel peace that we can't explain, in the unexpected support we receive from others, in the wisdom He provides when we need direction, and in the strength He gives us when we feel like giving up. God's protection is woven into the fabric of our everyday existence, often in ways we don't recognize until after the fact. It's in the divine timing that works everything out just when it needs to, in the doors that open at the right moment, in the people He sends to walk alongside us, and even in the closed doors that keep us from stepping into something harmful. Yeah! God bless it, I do believe you, because even though I thought, but perhaps the most powerful aspect of God's protection is that it's not based on our merit or worthiness. It's a gift, an expression of His deep and unshakable love for us. We don't earn His protection through our actions or our perfect obedience. God protects us because He loves us, because He is good, and because He is faithful. No matter where we are, no matter what we've done, God's protection is always available to us. It doesn't matter how far we've wandered or how broken we feel. God's love and protection are unchanging and constant, always waiting to surround us when we turn to Him. The beauty of God's protection is that it's not just about keeping us safe in the moments of crisis or danger. It's about His constant presence, guiding us through the ordinary days and helping us navigate life's most difficult seasons. There will be moments when we feel alone, when the weight of the world is heavy on our shoulders, when we wonder if we can keep going. But in those moments, we must remember that we are not alone. And you see me, I'm seeing you, and there is no such thing as too much faith. God is with us, even in the silence, even in the struggle. His protection is not always loud and dramatic, but it's always there, quietly sustaining us, holding us steady when everything around us seems to be falling apart. There are times in life when we may wonder why God allows us to face certain challenges. We may question why we go through difficult moments, or why the storms of life seem to rage without end. But it's in these times that God's protection is most evident. He doesn't always prevent us from going through trials, but He promises to be with us every step of the way. He doesn't remove the hardships, but He gives us the tools, the strength, and the resilience to endure. His protection is in His presence, in His promises, and in His ability to turn every situation, no matter how painful, into something that will ultimately work for our good. When we face challenges, when we feel like we're walking through the fire, God's protection is there not only to shield us, but also to purify us, to refine us, and to draw us closer to Him. Through hardship, we learn to trust in His timing, to rely on His strength, and to lean into His love. The fire may be hot and the path may be difficult, but God walks with us through every step, never leaving our side. His protection isn't always about sparing us from suffering. It's about walking with us through the suffering and using that suffering to grow us, strengthen us, and mold us into the people He created us to be. We can also find comfort in the fact that God's protection doesn't just apply to the here and now. It extends beyond this life, beyond the present moment. His protection is eternal, and His promises are sure. He guards our souls, watches over our hearts, and ensures that no matter what we face on earth, nothing can separate us from his love. Nothing can separate us from his love. This is the ultimate protection, the security that comes from knowing that we are loved and cared for by the creator of the universe, that we are secure in his arms, and that nothing can ever take us out of his care. There may be trials, there may be moments of hardship, but the eternal protection of God ensures that we are held in his care forever. As we walk through life, we must remember that God's protection isn't just about shielding us from danger. It's about equipping us to face whatever comes our way with courage, faith, and hope. It's about trusting in his ability to lead us through the unknown, to guide us when we don't know what the next step is, and to sustain us when we feel weak. His protection is a source of strength that empowers us to face the world, not in fear, but in confidence, knowing that God is with us, that he has already gone before us, and that he will never leave us. We must also recognize that God's protection doesn't mean that life will always be easy or that we will be exempt from pain. God's protection is not about keeping us from every difficulty, but about helping us navigate life's challenges with grace, wisdom, and endurance. He doesn't promise that we will be free from storms, but he does promise to be with us in the midst of them. He promises to calm our hearts, to be our refuge, and to provide for us everything we need to face whatever comes our way. We don't always see the full picture in the moment. We don't always understand why things unfold the way they do, why certain doors close, or why certain paths seem blocked. But in time, we begin to see how God's protection was working behind the scenes, how he was orchestrating everything for our good, even when we didn't understand it. We may look back and realize that the danger we thought we were walking into was actually God protecting us from something far worse. And we may see that the hardships we endured were the very things that shaped us, strengthened us, and drew us closer to him. God's protection is not just about keeping us safe, it's about keeping us on the path that leads to his perfect will for our lives. It's about helping us grow, even through the difficulties, and ultimately bringing us to a place of greater peace, purpose, and fulfillment. As we close, let us remember that God's protection is a gift that is always available to us, no matter where we are or what we are going through. His protection is not just about the big moments of crisis, it's about his constant, unwavering presence in our lives. It is in the peace he gives us when the world feels chaotic, in the strength he provides when we are weak, and in the love that surrounds us every day. Let us walk in the assurance that we are never alone, that God is always with us, and that his protection is a constant and powerful force in our lives. We are safe in his care, secure in his love, and guided by his wisdom. And with that knowledge, we can face anything with courage, knowing that God's protection will carry us through. Finally, there's a supernatural timing that God works with. You might be wondering why things happen when they do, why certain events unfold in the order they do. But trust me, it's never by chance. It's divine timing. God is moving pieces into place to protect you, to keep you safe, even when you don't understand the journey. So I want you to know, when you walk out of here today, when you face the challenges that life throws at you, remember this: God is your protector. He's fighting battles you don't even know about. He's closing doors, sending people, and guiding you in ways that are beyond your understanding. When you can't see it, trust that he's at work. When you're confused, Trust that He's guiding your steps. And when danger seems close, trust that He's right there, surrounding you with His protection. In Pacific Palisades, in your home, in your workplace, in every step you take, God is with you. He's got you. And He will never let you go. God bless.